Welcome to Just Vibes. Let's play PVZ2.
The Mirror Room. 1. The Arrival. Sarah had been searching for a secluded place to get away for a while. City life had worn her down, and she needed peace and quiet to reset her mind. When she stumbled upon a small cabin rental deep in the woods, she booked it immediately. The ad promised tranquility, a chance to disconnect from the world, and most importantly, a chance to be alone. The cabin was a rustic, single-story structure, seemingly well kept, but with a touch of something old about it. It sat at the edge of a dense forest, a gravel path the only sign of civilization for miles. When Sarah arrived, the sun was just setting behind the trees, casting long, dark shadows over the cabin. She parked her car, grabbed her bags, and walked up the creaky wooden steps to the front door. She felt a chill despite the summer warmth. Something about the cabin felt off. The air was heavy, and she couldn't shake a sense of being watched. She brushed it off as nerves and entered. 2. Settling in. Inside, the cabin was cozy, with a wood-burning stove, a small kitchen, and a single bedroom. But there was something else that caught her attention immediately. Mirrors. They were everywhere. In the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, mirrors of all shapes and sizes hung on every wall. Some were ornate with gilded frames, while others were simple, old, and cracked. She counted 12 in total. Must be some kind of decorator's idea of rustic charm, Sarah muttered to herself, trying to dismiss the unease creeping up her spine. She walked over to the largest mirror in the living room and studied her reflection. For a moment, she thought she saw something move in the reflection behind her, a dark figure darting past the doorway. She turned around quickly, but the room was empty. Her heart rate quickened, but she forced herself to relax. "You're just tired," she told herself. "Maybe you need a nap." Default text 3. The first night. That night, Sarah lay in bed, staring at the mirror on the opposite wall. She'd tried to cover it with a towel, but it kept slipping off, revealing her dimly lit reflection in the moonlight. She couldn't help but feel as if her reflection was watching her, more intently than it should. Every time she shifted or moved, she half expected to see something move independently in the mirror. Hours passed, and sleep eluded her. Then, just as she began to drift off, she heard it. A faint whispering. At first, she thought it was the wind, but it grew louder and more distinct, forming words she couldn't quite make out. She sat up, heart pounding, and looked around the room. There was no one there, but the whispering persisted. It was coming from the mirror. Sarah's blood ran cold. She stared at the mirror, feeling dread pooling in her stomach. She wanted to get up and leave, but her body was frozen with fear. The whispering grew louder, a jumble of overlapping voices, until finally, she understood a single word: "Come." She bolted out of bed and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her. She stood in the hallway, breathing heavily, and tried to calm herself. "Get a grip, Sarah," she whispered to herself. "You're just imagining things." 4. The morning after. The next morning, Sarah decided she had to do something about the mirrors. She couldn't spend another night with them surrounding her. She went from room to room, taking each one down and stacking them in a closet. But no matter how many mirrors she removed, there was always one more hidden behind a door, above the fireplace, in a corner she hadn't noticed. And then she realized the largest mirror in the living room, the one she'd noticed first, was bolted to the wall. She tried to pry it off, but it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, she covered it with a blanket instead. She tried to shake off the sense of unease. "There," she said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. "No more mirrors." That day, she tried to distract herself with books, a walk through the forest, and even some light meditation. By evening, she was feeling calmer. She decided to stay one more night. After all, she told herself, it was just her imagination. She would be fine. 5. The mirror room. When night fell, she noticed something strange. No matter where she went in the cabin, she felt a compulsion to return to the living room. It was as if something was pulling her toward that covered mirror. She tried to resist, but eventually, she found herself standing before it, staring at the blanket covering the glass. The whispering started again, soft at first, but growing louder. Her breath quickened. She didn't want to pull the blanket off. She didn't want to see what was beneath it. But her hands moved on their own. She grabbed the blanket and yanked it away. The mirror was no longer reflecting the room. Instead, it showed a long, dark hallway, lined with even more mirrors. The whispering was louder now, coming from the depth of the hallway in the reflection. She stared into the mirror, horrified, as something moved at the end of the corridor. A figure, dark and indistinct, slowly walking toward her. She tried to back away, but her feet wouldn't move. Her reflection was gone, replaced by the hallway. The figure was getting closer, and as it did, the whispering turned into a low, guttural chant. 6. The reflection. With a sudden jolt, she was pulled into the mirror. The living room disappeared, replaced by the long hallway she had seen in the reflection. The mirrors on either side stretched infinitely, showing endless versions of herself, each one looking more terrified than the last. She turned to run, but the hallway seemed to go on forever. The chant grew louder, now a cacophony of voices, all speaking in a language she didn't understand. She glanced at the mirrors as she ran and saw her reflections moving out of sync, some turning to look at her with twisted, distorted faces, their eyes wide and mouths open in silent screams. Panic gripped her. She had to find a way out. She kept running, her footsteps echoing in the endless corridor, until she came to a door. Without thinking, she threw it open and stumbled through. 7. The other side. She found herself back in the living room of the cabin. She gasped with relief, but something was wrong. The room was darker, colder. She looked around and realized with growing horror that the room was reversed, like a mirror image. And there, on the wall, was the mirror she had tried to cover, except now, it wasn't a mirror at all. It was a window. Through it, she could see her own living room, the real one. And standing there, staring back at her with a wicked smile, was her reflection, or what used to be her reflection. It looked just like her, but its eyes were darker, its grin wider, almost too wide for its face. She pounded on the glass, screaming, "Let me out!" She shouted, "You can't do this!" Her reflection raised a finger to its lips, mocking her with a shushing gesture. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing from view. Panic set in as she realized the truth. She was trapped on the other side, and whatever that thing was, it was in her place now. 8. The final revelation. Desperate, she looked around the reversed room for another way out, but all she found were more mirrors, and each one showed a different version of herself, some crying, some screaming, others with blank, empty eyes. Then she saw it. In one of the mirrors, a version of herself stood motionless, staring at her with a look of pure terror. But behind her reflection, in the shadows, something was moving. A tall, dark figure, its limbs impossibly long and bent at odd angles, crept closer to her mirror self. It reached out with a hand that seemed to stretch and twist, fingers elongated like claws. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling her ears with a maddening drone. She looked around, trying to find where the sound was coming from, but there was no escape. The shadows closed in around her, and she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She spun around, but there was nothing there, only her reflection, staring back at her with wide, terrified eyes. But it wasn't moving. She reached out and touched the glass, and her reflection did not follow. She realized with horror that she wasn't looking at herself anymore. Then she felt it cold, skeletal fingers wrapping around her shoulders, pulling her back into the darkness. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her was her reflection, smiling as it walked away, leaving her trapped forever in the mirror room. 9. The new tenant. A week later, a new traveler arrived at the cabin. A woman, just like Sarah, looking for some peace and quiet away from the city. She found the cabin charming, especially the large mirror in the living room, where she saw her reflection smile back at her. But something about the smile seemed wrong.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's meet in the next game.